So the Super Bowl just ended, and you know what that means. It's NFL mock draft season. And I'm trying a bit of NFL content on my channel rather than the typical NBA content, so hopefully you like this video. With the first pick, I have the Titans taking Abdul Carter out of Penn State. Carter has been flying up draft boards recently, with him showcasing his freakish athleticism and quickness in the college football playoff this past season. He's been getting Micah Parsons comps because obviously they both went to Penn State and are similar kinds of players relying more on speed and finesse than power, which isn't to say those guys don't have strength, but they are more of a speed rusher archetype, which teams value extremely high nowadays. For Tennessee, they get a potential generational edge rusher to help jumpstart their rebuild, and you may say that they need a bunch of other positions, but they need edge, and I don't know if they keep guys like Jeffrey Simmons and Harold Landry long term. And if they get an absolute stud on the D-line at arguably the second most valuable position in football, it would be great for them going forward. At number 2, I have the Browns taking Cam Ward, and while the Browns are in a similar boat to Tennessee, being they both need a quarterback, it seems like the Titans might run it back with Will Levis next year, so that's why I have them taking Abdul Carter. That being said, you already know the story with the Browns, most likely. They've needed a franchise quarterback for so long, and the cycle seems to never end, but hopefully Cam Ward comes in and is that guy for them. The Browns have a lot of talent on their roster as currently constructed, and down the line they will have to let some guys go. But nevertheless, they have a really solid team, which made the playoffs a couple seasons ago with the help of Joe Flacco, and this year they were projected to be a lot better than they were. ESPN had them at 8.2 projected wins coming into the season, but their biggest issue was their horrific quarterback play. Even though Jameis Winston had some good games and was definitely a fun watch as always. To make a long story short, Cleveland needs a quarterback, and Cam Ward is projected as the best in the class. Whether that comes true or not, only time will tell. At number 3, I have the Giants taking Shedeur Sanders. This may surprise some people because recently Shedeur has been falling down draft boards, and I'm not saying he's a typical round 1 quarterback prospect, but he is the consensus number 2 quarterback option on the board, and the Giants have been searching for their guy for a while. He's shown flashes of greatness in college, being one of, if not the most accurate quarterback in the entire country, and has made big time plays in big time moments. However, when you watch him, his flaws are very noticeable. He tends to hold on to the ball for too long and isn't physically jumping off the page in any major category. But all that to say, I think he has the potential to be a quality quarterback in this league for a long time, and it has nothing to do with his last name. At number 4, I have the Pats taking Travis Hunter. The Colorado boys go back-to-back in this scenario, and Hunter also falls a bit in this scenario, with most places having Travis going top 2, but maybe the first 3 teams value other positions of need more than wide receiver and corner. All that being said, Travis Hunter is a can't-miss generational talent on both sides of the football. His body control, athleticism, and pure football instincts are absolutely ridiculous, and if he can continue to develop as a route runner or as a guy in coverage, there's no doubt in my mind that he'll be one of the best players in the league sooner rather than later. A bit of a side note, whoever it was on Twitter that started this whole notion that Travis isn't really that good of a player, he just plays both sides, you're acting like a hater and you're a casual who just wants to see this guy fail. Quit projecting. Just because you may think something sounds like it makes sense, doesn't make it true. Kind of like the people who were saying that the only reason why DeMar Hamlin is still playing for the Bills is because of what happened to him. They wouldn't play him if they had better options. And he was a part of a really good defensive unit this year in Buffalo. But besides the side tangent, next up's the Jaguars. I have them taking Will Johnson at the 5th pick. The Jaguars are in a similar boat as the Browns. They made the playoffs a couple of seasons ago and have a good bit of talent on their roster, but unlike them, they have their franchise quarterback in Trevor Lawrence, even though he's been banged up and disappointing so far in his career. So this next season is going to be the biggest of his career, without a doubt. But anyway, this team needs a lot of help, but especially in the secondary, which is why I had them taking Will Johnson. You look at Jacksonville's roster, and their secondary might be their worst position group. Tyson Campbell is injury prone, and are you really confident in Ronald Darby being your number 1 potential corner for you? Probably not. And Will Johnson's an absolute stud, probably the best pure cornerback prospect in this class, with his excellent length and size for the position, standing at 6'2", and his ability to play very well in man and zone coverage schemes. He's gotten comps to guys like Patrick Surtain and James Bradbury. That kind of player would be very helpful for the Jaguars long term. At the 6th pick, I have the Raiders taking Tetairoa McMillan. As a Raiders fan, sadly, looking at a roster, it's pretty rough. We need talent and depth across the board, but looking at the players available at the 6th pick, Tetairoa McMillan looks to add to this up-and-coming offensive core, with Brock Bowers already being a premier tight end, Jakobi Meyers being an underrated receiver, a bit of a do-it-all guy, and Trey Tucker, who's shown the ability to make big splash plays at times. McMillan could come in and be the immediate #1 receiver. His archetype is comparable to guys like Drake London and Mike Evans, with his towering 6'5" frame and ability to be a threat in the short and long passing game. He put up some big-time numbers during his time in college at Arizona, and can hopefully translate that to the NFL. At number 7, I have the Jets taking Mason Graham out of Michigan. The Jets. Where can I start for the Jets? Well, it seems everything is blowing up in their face per usual, and who knows the future for Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams. With all that being said, this is a roster that has a lot of talent on it, and I think in this scenario, they take Mason Graham out of Michigan, who's a beast and can help Quinnen Williams out on the defensive line. And the Jets allowed a little over 120 rushing yards per game last season, if I can remember correctly. And getting a potential dominant tackle to make their D-line even better could be big time. Next up, I have Carolina taking James Pierce Jr. The Panthers showed a lot of improvement as a team last season compared to their previous season, especially towards the latter half of the year. This team has a bunch of young and upcoming players on the offensive side of the ball and has legit talent at a lot of position groups, but the weakest is probably their edge rusher group. After trading away Brian Burns last season, their ability to get to the quarterback on defense suffered, with them being bottom 3 in the league in total sacks as a team. Looking long term for the Panthers, their edge rusher room consists of guys like Ashawn Robinson and Jadeveon Clowney. Go Cox. So it's safe to say they can use an upgrade, especially for a guy who has big time game record potential like Pierce does. He was a projected top 5 pick before the season started and has fluctuated since with the down year this year compared to his 23 campaign at Tennessee, but nevertheless, he could be a game changer for the Panthers. At number 9, I have the Saints taking Mykel Williams out of Georgia. The Saints take another SEC rusher with the next pick, with Williams being from Georgia and Pierce being from Tennessee. I think people aren't talking about the Saints enough in terms of how bleak their future looks. A lot of their key players are older guys. You look at Derek Carr. Alvin Kamara isn't particularly old, but for a halfback he is. Demario Davis, Tyrann Mathieu, Cam Jordan. It's just a lot of older players everywhere, so I think that this might be one of the worst teams in the entire league next year. In this scenario, the Saints get a guy with the kind of size that teams fawn over, with Williams standing at a good 6'5", 265, and physically has all the tools to be an elite player. The knock on Williams is that he didn't have the best production at Georgia, as you would typically like to see for a top edge rusher. That could be because Georgia is stacked across the board, and so he couldn't really showcase his potential versus if he was on a worse team. But he could potentially be the successor to a guy like Cam Jordan and pair him up with a guy like Brian Bresee. At number 10, I have the Bears taking Will Campbell. This is quite possibly the best pick for the Bears in my opinion, with Campbell being the consensus best O-lineman in this year's class. And for a team that allowed the most sacks in the league by far last year, that's amazing value at pick 10. This would hopefully allow Caleb Williams a lot more time in the pocket to operate, and overall help this offense out. And maybe we'll finally see a dynamic Bears offense with new coach Ben Johnson. The only real knock on Campbell as a prospect would be that he has short arms to play tackle in the NFL, which is what he played in college, so he'll probably get moved to guard in the pros. But the Bears definitely need that too. Next up, I have San Francisco taking Josh Simmons out of Ohio State. I have the Niners taking a tackle here, mainly because they are still one of the most talented rosters in the league, but they suffered the injury bug this past season. And if you look at their team, Trent Williams is definitely getting up there in age, so it might be time for them to get a future franchise tackle. Simmons, in his limited time that he played last year at Ohio State, was nothing short of dominant, except for really in that Oregon game, and if it wasn't for injury, he might have been able able to string together some more strong performances, and his draft stock might have been even higher. There's also the inverse, with people saying that, oh, well, he played not great competition, that's why he looked good. So the jury is still out on Josh Simmons, but a lot of scouts like him, and he could be a potential game changer for San Fran going forward. At the 12th pick, I have the Cowboys taking Luther Burden. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why wouldn't the Cowboys take Ashton Jeanty here? And honestly, that's what they're probably going to do. But I think in a class where there's a lot of running back talent, receiver is a more pressing need for them. You watch the Cowboys and you see CeeDee Lamb. We know he's electrifying, but he causes so much defensive attention that it's almost sad to watch. Lamb got flat out beat up this year, in large part because Dak is a known gunslinger, but mostly because the other Cowboys receivers really aren't that good. Brandon Cooks is old, Kevontae Turpin is more of a speed threat instead of a polished route runner, and Jalen Tolbert is fine, but isn't getting open enough. In this scenario, Dallas takes a guy who's shown the ability to play on the outside and in the slot. Did have a bit of a down year, but that's mostly thanks to bad quarterback play in Missouri. Burden has been a projected top pick for the last 2 years now, and I think he would make this Dallas offense much more dynamic. At 13, this may come as a bit of a surprise. I have the Dolphins taking Tyler Booker out of Alabama. This pick isn't necessarily the best when it comes to picking the best player available. It's a decision that's been gaining a lot more traction recently. If the Dolphins' biggest priority is protecting Tua and they need help on the O-line, go out and get a really solid guard that could come in right away and protect Tua and help out your offense tremendously. The Dolphins really felt the loss of guard Robert Hunt last season, and so getting Tyler Booker hopefully can be that guy to fill that void that Hunt left. Next up, I have the Colts taking Tyler Warren out of Penn State. We see the Colts get a big time upgrade at the tight end position. I think they had Mo Alley Cox and Kylan Granson last year. Sheesh. But we saw Warren this past season be without a doubt a complete game wrecker at times for Penn State, with him finishing top 6 or 7 in the Heisman race, I believe. He possesses elite traits and physical tools that you look for in a real elite tight end prospect. He could be a big threat in the passing game, but also in the blocking game as well, and can hopefully come in and give Anthony Richardson yet another playmaker to hopefully maximize his play on the field. At 15, I have the Falcons taking Jelon Walker out of Georgia. I know earlier I said I'm a Raiders fan, but I'm also a Falcons fan, so let's not get into that can of worms. But if you watch the Falcons, it's been the same story the past couple of seasons. We cannot get pressure on the opposing quarterback. We traded for Matt Judon, but he's getting older and he wasn't that great this season. And Grady Jarrett is also getting older. We drafted a couple of guys on the defensive lineman that seemed decent, but nothing to write home about. Jalen Walker was sort of a Swiss Army knife for the Georgia Bulldogs last year and has been used as an edge and as an off-ball linebacker. Hopefully he could come in and do a bit of both for a struggling Falcons defense. Maybe a Frankie Louvu or Kyle Van Noy type of player. I just hope we take an edge rusher. At 16, I have the Cardinals taking Walter Nolan out of Ole Miss. I don't like using this word all the time because the internet has killed it, but the Cardinals really are the definition of mid. They go from good to mediocre quarterback play, and no other position group on this roster is necessarily terrible, but none of them are great either. A guy like Walter Nolan was a beast for Ole Miss last season, and was a former #1 overall recruit coming out of high school, depending on where you look. He's just your prototypical interior lineman prospect and possesses really good size, strength, and speed, and could give a Cardinals defensive front that struggled last year a much needed boost going forward. There's a bunch of directions you could go from here if you're Arizona, but we've seen interior linemen have a huge impact on winning. Just look at guys like Aaron Donald, who's of course retired now, Chris Jones, Jalen Carter, Cam Hayward, and Nolan has all the upside in the world as a prospect. At 17, I have the Bengals taking Shamar Stewart. Cincinnati is in an interesting spot with them having one of the most dynamic offenses in the entire league, while also having one of the worst defenses in the league. And if you look at the Bengals here, maybe you take receiver to hopefully fill the void that T. Higgins will leave if he walks in free agency. But in my opinion, I think an offense headed by Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase will be just fine compared to a horrid defensive unit. Stewart has ridiculous size and strength at the edge rusher position, standing at 6'5", 281, with very, very long arms, and he had himself a monster Senior Bowl performance, with some people saying he was the best player there. He could potentially be a big-time upgrade for the Bengals at edge and help out Trey Hendrickson get some pressure on the opposing quarterback. At 18, I have the Seahawks taking Mike Green out of Marshall. You know how I said the Cardinals are the definition of mid? Well, somehow their division rivals, the Seahawks, are even more mid to me. They have a lot of quality players. Kenneth Walker, JSN, DK, Leonard Williams, Tariq Woolen, Devon Weatherspoon, but no one really jumps off the page and indicates that they will be much more than a potential first-round exit. But peaking at 18, in this situation, they take a sort of polarizing prospect in Mike Green here. Let's look at the facts first. We know Mike Green was a baller in college. He went to a smaller D1 school in Marshall, but still led the FBS in sacks last year with 17, which is absolutely ridiculous, especially for college. And he's also known for his relentless motor, aka that dog. As I'm sure most of you saw, he absolutely destroyed Josh Connerly on that one rep at the Senior Bowl. However, he did not play the greatest competition while at Marshall, and he's a bit undersized for a pro edge rusher, just weighing a little under 250 pounds, so there's reason for concern. Think a guy in a similar situation to what Max Crosby was in. If I'm Seattle, I could potentially get a guy who's an elite edge rusher in the middle of the first and be known as the team who took a chance on Mike Green, or be known as the team who wasted his potential. But for a team with no clear direction, I like this pick for Seattle. At 19, I have the Bucs taking Jahad Campbell out of Alabama. One of my favorite fits so far in this mock draft, with the Bucs having some serious struggles on the defensive end, more so with their pass defense. Let's keep it a buck. As great as Levante David is, he's old as shit at this point. And you're going to need some better off-ball linebackers there in Tampa for the future. Campbell isn't projected as a monster of a linebacker like David, but he's shown to be able to make a bunch of good tackles while being pretty good in coverage. He recorded over 100 tackles this season at Alabama, landing him first team All-SEC honors, and he's only 21 years of age, so he would have plenty of time to learn from guys like Levante David in the locker room, and could potentially be the Bucs' Mike linebacker for the future. At the 20th pick, I have the Broncos taking Colston Loveland out of Michigan. Yes, I know 2 tight ends going in the first round probably isn't the most realistic thing, historically speaking, but for a team like the Broncos, I could see this being a good move. Loveland has played in some really big games in college and has shown the ability to be a real weapon in the vertical passing game. I believe he's a former basketball player, so we've seen guys like Jimmy Graham and Tony Gonzalez thrive in their roles at tight end after playing basketball. So I'm sure Sean Payton would love to have a potential threat. Maybe not as good as those guys, but you never know. Also, Loveland played in Michigan, and I'm sure Payton would love to snatch away one of Harbaugh's players before the Chargers pick, since they're in the same division with LA, and they also need an upgrade at tight end as well. At 21, I have the Steelers taking Malachi Starks. Personally here, I would prefer if the Steelers took a guy like Emeka Egbuka or Matthew Golden at this spot, being they desperately need help at the receiver position. However, this is the Steelers we're talking about, and they usually don't do stuff like that. And all signs are pointing that they're going to run it back under the Mike Tomlin regime, and they won't blow it up like they probably should, considering this team has not won a playoff game in like 7 years. With all that being said, Starks has been projected as the best safety prospect in this class basically for the entire season, and he could help a young secondary headlined by guys like Beanie Bishop, Joey Porter Jr., and Minka, even though he's not that young anymore. They were a bottom 10 team in terms of passing yards allowed per game last season, and for all the praise that they get for their defensive line, they didn't show it when it mattered the most, which, if you didn't know, in the playoff loss to Baltimore, they allowed 299 rushing yards in that game. So Starks could help them in the secondary, but the future does not look bright for the Steelers, but it never really looks bright in Pittsburgh anyway. So at 22, I have the Chargers taking Ashton Jeanty. The moment you've all been waiting for. Jeanty slides way down the board and falls into the Chargers' lap here at pick 22. My reasons for him falling this far have absolutely nothing to do with him as a player. There's no denying that he's a special talent at running back and will probably be one of the better ones in the league sooner rather than later. But we have to remember that teams don't value the position like they used to, especially compared to other big-time positions. That's why you see a lot of edge rushers go off the board early, because the NFL values that position a lot more. But if you're LA here, I don't really see a way that you can pass up on a guy like Jeanty, especially since Jim Harbaugh is a run-first coach, and maybe they go receiver here, but the guys on the board aren't necessarily huge number 1 projected kind of guys. And if you watch the Chargers, that's the kind of guy they need. Ladd McConkey looks great. As an inside slot receiver, but they need an outside X type to really thrive on offense. Maybe they go out and get T. Higgins or someone like that to help Justin Herbert. Imagine if they had T. Higgins, Ladd McConkey, and Ashton Jeanty running the ball. That would be a scary team. Next up, I have the Green Bay Packers taking Jeanty Barron. Green Bay is an interesting team to think about. You look at their roster and they have really good talent at basically every position, but there's a few positions where they need to upgrade, corner being one of them. Jair Alexander is making a ton of money and is injury prone and could potentially be cut, and after trading Rasul Douglas, the position doesn't look that bright. When you look at the corners on the board, maybe you would think they would take a guy like Benjamin Morrison or Shavon Revel, but both of them have injury concerns, and if you're the Packers, I don't think you want to go down that scare again, especially with the limited depth that you have at that position already. Jeanty Barron was very healthy in college, played 3 full years at Texas, and this past season played very well. He was in a lot of different packages for the Longhorns and thrived in a lot of big-time situations. He's scouted as a very high IQ football player, and hopefully can translate that into the league. The main gripe with him as a prospect would be that he's not the tallest or fastest corner, but if you're a good player regardless of the physical traits, they don't matter as much. At 24, I have the Vikings taking Benjamin Morrison. I know I just said that Morrison has injury concerns, but he's still one of the top corner prospects in this draft, with his quickness and ability to play on the outside and in the slot being his most notable traits. And for Minnesota, they were great defensively, but they need to get younger in the secondary because guys like Harrison Smith and Stephon Gilmore are really getting up there in age. And hopefully, they can mentor the likes of Morrison and help him become a very good corner, which I believe can happen, especially considering Byron Murphy transformed into a Pro Bowl caliber DB this year. So hopefully a similar thing can happen for Morrison. At the 25th pick, I have the Texans taking Emeka Egbuka. Honestly, it would be great if Houston addressed their number one priority, which should be protecting CJ Stroud and drafting an offensive lineman early in the draft, considering he was sacked the second most in the league this year. But I don't think people quite understand that receiver is another big position of need for them. Stephon Diggs is older, got hurt this year, and is a free agent, so we don't know if he's coming back. And as sad as it is, Tank Dell might be out for the entire next season. And with their other options besides their number one in Nico Collins being old Robert Woods and John Mechie III, they definitely should consider drafting receiver at this point. And who better to take than CJ Stroud's college teammate, Emeka Egbuka. He could go a lot higher in this draft considering he's a really good prospect. He's probably the best route runner in this class, at least at this moment in time, and already has a great connection with CJ, so that would be really good for Houston's morale and chemistry. Egbuka projects as more of a slot guy in the NFL, and I think Houston is a great home for them because if he's on the inside and Nico's on the outside, that sounds like a nightmare for opposing defenses. At 26, I have the Rams taking Kelvin Banks Jr. The Rams in this scenario take an offensive lineman to help protect Matthew Stafford some more as he gets up there in age. He still looks to be one of the better QBs in the league, and I think LA is going to try to maximize his window as their quarterback. And they take a guy who was a 3-year starter at Texas and played in some big time games and was very good. However, he wasn't necessarily dominant, and he isn't as big as your ideal tackle in the league, so he may move on the inside, but according to some people, he may stay on the outside. Only time will tell. I have the Ravens doing something similar to the Rams with their next pick taking Josh Connolly out of Oregon. After another disappointing ending to the season for Baltimore, they are still on paper a really good team, so finding someone to help right now isn't the easiest thing to do, which is why I have them taking a lineman in Josh Connolly. I know, as I mentioned earlier, everyone saw him got absolutely destroyed by Mike Green on that one rep at the Senior Bowl. But again, it was just one rep, and apparently he was really good throughout the rest of it, and Connolly only allowed 2 sacks over the last 3 years as a starting tackle for the Oregon Ducks. So he's shown ability to protect the quarterback. Similarly to Banks though, he doesn't have the size that you would like to see for a franchise tackle, so he may too get moved on the interior, but he could still very well be starting for them at tackle sooner rather than later, if taken here. At 28, I have the Lions taking Jack Sawyer. The Lions are one of the most talented teams in the NFL and should be one of the favorites to make a deep postseason run next year. But one glaring thing they need is to be able to get pressure on the outside. After Aiden Hutchinson went down, their pass rush was noticeably worse and traded for Zadarius Smith, but Smith is older and Hutch may lose a bit of quickness, so edge should still be what Detroit targets here. And Sawyer fits the description of a guy that Dan Campbell loves. High motor, an absolute dog. And he also played very well for the Buckeyes this year, especially when it came playoff time. So I think Sawyer would be a great fit for this Detroit defensive unit. At 29, I have the Commanders taking Shavon Revel. The Commanders had an absolutely phenomenal season, surprising everyone, even their most delusional fans, and they made it to the NFC Championship after having the second pick last year. At this point, we know what it is with them. Jaden Daniels is that guy and was elite this year and gave this team hope for the first time in a long time. A position of need for this team, however, is the cornerback position. I know they traded for Marshawn Lattimore midway through the year, and he's great, but besides that, their DB room is pretty messy. Shavon Revel has big time potential as a corner with him possessing great speed, height, and length for the position. He could come into Dan Quinn's system and thrive as a really nice player for them, but the concerns for him are valid. He too has injury concerns, and he also played at East Carolina in college, so he didn't play the best competition. Think of him as this year's Quinyon Mitchell. Hopefully for Washington, like Mitchell, the lack of competition in college won't matter for Revel, and he'll be great for them. At the 30th pick, I have the Bills taking Derek Harmon out of Oregon. You know the story with the Bills. Good team, can't get past the Chiefs. Not much to complain about besides that. They could use some help on the interior line, and Derek Harmon has big time potential at defensive tackle. He has a great size, standing at 6'5", 310, and is very hard to move and has made strides in both the run defense and pass rush departments, and could make this Bills pass rush elite. So, the last two picks, if you didn't know, I'm recording this before the Super Bowl. Hopefully it goes out a little after the Super Bowl. Whoever wins really doesn't affect who I have these teams taking. I have the Eagles taking Kyle Kennard here. A bit of a homer pick here. Go Cox. But if you look at this Eagles roster, they have basically every box covered when it comes to team construction. But the one glaring thing is the lack of dominant edge rusher. Kennard was dominant for South Carolina against really good competition in the SEC. And you know the Eagles love their SEC guys. So I could see Kennard going to Philly and being a real problem and adding to their stacked defensive line core of Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter. And with the last pick, I have the Chiefs taking Cam Williams. You don't want to hear me talk about the Chiefs, so I'll keep it short. He's had an up and down season at Texas, but has all the physical traits to be really good. He has the size, arm length, and frame to be a problem, but he was somewhat inconsistent as a starter this year against good competition. But for the Chiefs' sake, hopefully he maximizes his potential and becomes the franchise tackle they've been looking for a while at this point. And if you're still here in the video, thank you for watching, and until next time.